If you clicked on this video, odds are that you love basketball, and more importantly, you love the NBA. Now, I say all this to say that I feel like there's been a really weird energy with the NBA fans, how it's covered, how it's treated, how it's talked about over the last couple of years. And it's something that I kind of want to wrap my head around because I haven't really been able to put my finger on it. So I want to make this video to try to talk about all of the factors that I think feed into what I like to call the NBA negativity epidemic that we currently have. If you're new here, welcome in. And if you know me, welcome back. Thank you guys so much for visiting my channel. I appreciate all of the growth. I appreciate all of the comments, all the likes, all the shares. Everything you do helps out my channel. I cannot stress that enough. And I really, guys, appreciate what you've done so far and what you will do in the future. So without further ado, let's get back to the video. Now, the main reason why I've been making this video so far is that up until this part of the season, there has been so much discourse about why NBA ratings are down. And I'm gonna say this, as a fan of sports for 29 years, I can't remember the last time that a league's ratings were talked about so much and cared about so much. Look, me personally, I know the NBA isn't going to go under anytime soon. I pay for League Pass, and whatever money the NBA makes in the TV deals and whatever has nothing to do with me. And I personally think that there are a lot of factors to why NBA ratings might be down, and we're going to probably talk about some of those factors in this video. But I think that I'd be remiss to talk about, like, people keep saying like NBA ratings are like, people, it's really popular on Twitter to see an NBA highlight or something bad about the NBA and be like, this is why NBA ratings are down. It's really popular to say that. And now I know that a lot of people on Twitter know that it's not just because of this reason, but sometimes people say that it is. I don't know how popular this opinion is, but a really popular opinion has been how the NBA is played. And the biggest culprit, or one of the #1 reasons or factors, is that people think that the NBA is taking too many threes. Now, me personally, I have never really watched a game, an NBA game, and been like, wow, they're sure taking a lot of threes, man. This is too many threes out here. But for one, because I'm a Detroit Pistons fan, we as Pistons teams over the years have not been popular in that front at like many times or any times. I can't remember the last Pistons team off the top of my head that was like, they're taking too many threes, but but I do totally understand, because the NBA has had a big 3-point boom and it keeps on getting higher and higher. I totally get that. And I have never seen this as a negative to the sport of basketball. I always think that basketball is a game of trends. People like NBA is a copycat league. I think that's also a cop-out. I think that it's easy for us to be like, everyone in the NBA plays the same, when that's not the case. That's not the case. I don't think that will ever be the case. I think that there are bits and pieces that you take from certain teams, or you like that play, you introduce that in their playbook. But I don't think teams are out here just copying and pasting an entire playbook. And there are certain people on Twitter that have been showing clips about the NBA, and it's just a lot of like missed threes. It's like a bad basketball sequence. Now, you've seen basketball at every level. There are awful basketball sequences in every level, no matter what, where there's a whole lot of missed layups, where there's a whole lot of, again, I've watched bad basketball for a long time. You have those stretches where you're like, oh my God, this is what okay. And yeah, I think when you watch an NBA game and you can take a snippet of NBA players like missing 3 or 4 threes in a row, and then you can quote tweet and be like, this is why ratings are down. No, I think, again, it's just the casual, social media where you can take any clip and not provide context at all, or just take any clip of an otherwise great basketball game and complain about it and do well. I'm not making this video to say that I'm above the negativity epidemic as well. Rudy Gobert played a great game on Christmas, but then he threw up one of the worst left-handed shots I've ever seen. And I put that on Twitter being like, I can't believe that happened, but he had a great game otherwise. I was just saying that, but I wasn't posting on Twitter to be like, Rudy Gobert played an awful game. I was just like, what is he doing? And now Twitter's at a point where you can tweet something and you can go to sleep and the next day it goes viral. It's really because I remember like older Twitter, you could post a tweet and you knew it was going viral because it had more linear growth, where I feel like this Twitter, now that they've added the For You stuff, it gets more exponential. So like I'll tweet something and go to sleep, wake up, and it has like way too many eyes on it. And anyway, that's just another gripe I have with Twitter. I have made another video about the decline of sports Twitter. I encourage you guys to check it out. Now, I'm seeing a lot of people in sports media and in social media in general talking about how they miss the mid-range shot, how they miss how basketball was played or whatnot. And I totally get that. But at the same time, you know, I'm coming from a team that takes a lot of they take a lot of mid-range shots, not a lot of threes. I've seen that for a while. And I think that we as basketball fans often look at other eras with nostalgia goggles, and we use those nostalgia goggles to turn around and absolutely crap on the current era that we have, right? Because maybe your team is not good. Maybe your team isn't like playing the optimal way of basketball that has been whatever, and then you go, oh, I missed the mid-range. I'm gonna be honest with you, man, the mid-range still exists. A lot of all-stars and a lot of the best players in the league still operate out of the mid-range. I think that NBA teams have gotten rid of the role player mid-range shots and the role player long twos. If you go to the 2003 NBA finals, if you go to the game 6, there is basically a montage of role players taking the longest long twos of all time. And I'm glad that shot's out of basketball. I'm just glad, me personally. And often I haven't really complained about, like, I don't complain about how basketball is being played, because I feel like every era looking different over time is cool. I personally think it's really cool that basketball is like, hey, maybe we shouldn't have 2 non-shooting bigs on the court at once. Maybe that can open up the offense for everybody involved. Wouldn't that be cool? Oh, hey, what if a guard actually screened for a big? Isn't that nice? Like that would be really sick to me. That idea of the evolution of basketball is really cool to me, and I'm never like watching basketball being like, oh man, I wish the 2000s that's never in my mind. I feel like we like the idea of 2000s we often like the idea of that era of basketball, but we only think about the highlights of that era and not the lowlights of that era. And I think that goes for all the eras of basketball. Now, another recent discussion has been about how Victor Wembanyama is taking too many threes. Now, earlier I made a video on this channel about Victor Wembanyama taking a lot of threes, and Maxey was taking a lot of threes. Now, my thing with Victor Wembanyama was that those threes were like really farther out than they needed to be, and it felt like bad shot selection, and he ironed that down. Now, I think that when Victor Wembanyama is taking those threes at a below average clip, it's you have to kind of say something, be like, maybe that, but he like ironed that out. And I saw a tweet that went viral because Victor Wembanyama went 7 for 15 from 3, and I was like, what are we doing here? That's a great percentage. What is the complaint about? Literally, we are complaining about the next evolutionary player in basketball, right? LeBron's about to retire soon. You're gonna have to come to terms with that. But we've been gifted this 7'4" dude that can shoot from 3. He has the wing player of any player from the Monstars, basically. And we're gonna enjoy this type of basketball for a decade plus, hopefully, at least. Yeah, so here's the tweet where it goes, there's a 7'3" center who is 7 for 15 from 3-point range tonight. The NBA is broken. I think that's one of the coolest things ever. I'm gonna be completely honest. I never thought the league would get to this place. Like, this is what I'm talking about, where like we see so many cool things in the NBA today, and we're just so eager to hate on it. We're just so eager to be negative about it. We're so eager to just denounce whatever new talent or even old school style talent. Everything, I feel like we as NBA fans, we just find a way to complain about it. And it's kind of getting tiring. And I'm not saying that I'm excluded from that. Sometimes I'm very negative as well, but it does kind of get tiring when that's all you see. Does that make sense? One of the things that's currently going around is people are calling Shai Gilgeous-Alexander a foul merchant. a free throw merchant or whatever, when he's averaged more free throws per game in previous seasons, but even though it's like 7.9 free throws per game, people are still calling him a foul merchant. And I'm saying here is that 7.9 free throws a game, I don't think is that bad. We've been way higher in the past. I don't think that SGA is a foul merchant at all. Don't get me wrong. I think the thing that I don't get is that there are a lot of NBA fans that are like, I miss the mid-range or whatnot. And then they'll see like something that SGA is doing, or they're seeing how like Devin Booker's playing, and they're quick to denounce that. And I'm like, this is the play style you want. There are players in the league currently that play how you want. I think that we're actually in an NBA era that has the highest variation of style. We're in a variation of the NBA where not every play ends in a post up. I think that we are in an era of the NBA where there are multiple different strategies to get to where you want to go. I think when you see this, when you see Kevin Durant, you see all these other mid-range assassins, right? But then NBA players are like, I miss the mid-range. I'm like, I can give you like 15 players that use the mid-range right off the bat. For the Knicks, Bridges had 41 on Christmas Day. That was the mid-range, baby. Also, I just want to say that I'm really glad that the NBA Christmas Day games were great. They were all bangers. Spurs, Knicks, Warriors, Lakers, Celtics, Sixers, like all of those, man. I personally, I did make a TikTok being like, I thought that Celtics Sixers was going to be nap time, because usually I eat a lot of food and I sleep through one of the NBA basketball games, and it is usually nap time at that around that time. But I digress. These were all great matchups, and I think that this Christmas Day slate was exactly what the league needed, especially for like being like, yo, do you remember how good NBA games are? Thank you. We have these 5 bangers that you got. Now I'm going to move on to other factors of the NBA negativity epidemic. I think the first and the biggest problem is how the league perceives all of the teams. Now I know that pandering to bigger markets, I get the whole thing bottom dollar wise, top dollar wise, bottom dollar. I get the whole thing dollar wise, okay? But there's just some things you just cannot do. So the biggest example that I have right now is the in-season tournament, where the Thunder and the Rockets got an in-season tournament, NBA Cup matchup. For those of you that have been watching the NBA or following the NBA along, you know that this is a really exciting matchup. You have two of the best defenses in recent memory facing off against each other. You got two of the youngest teams. You got one of them, I think they were like 1 and 2 in the West at this point, or Houston was like top 3 as well, or something like that. These are both two really good teams. There's a whole lot of youth on these teams, and there are so many players on each side to get excited for, whether it's Şengün, whether it's Amen Thompson, whether it's SGA, whether it's J-Dub, you know, whether it's Isaiah Joe. Like there are so many players on this team where you're like, yeah, on each team where you're like, yeah, these are really fun basketball players. Let me watch this. But on NBA.com, they literally said on the website, Houston Rockets versus Oklahoma City Thunder may have not been the NBA matchup the league was hoping for. You know where that was posted on? This was posted on NBA.com. Now, this really pissed me off, because imagine that you're a fan of one of these two teams, right? You make it to the NBA Cup, and the thing that shows up on the actual league website is the fact that your two teams, yeah, the league was hoping for someone else. I cannot imagine the league, I cannot imagine the NFL getting like a primetime game and being like, well, Bengals versus Texans wasn't the marquee matchup today that teams were like the league was hoping for. Yeah, maybe you can have a league. You can have like leagues be like, yeah, we want this matchup because it gets more ratings, but you can't say it. You can't outwardly put it on the website. I could not believe this happened. And this also feeds in the negativity factor. Be like, yo, as much of a fan of as you are of these teams, it feels like the league is against you. And that kind of, I don't know, personally, it makes me not as excited for what should be exciting about my team. If the league is actively being like, yo, we wish that someone else was in the in-season tournament right now, but I guess it'll, like that, you cannot, and I know that whoever wrote this article does not speak for the league and of itself, But the fact is that this should not be on an NBA.com website. You gotta be better than this. You gotta be better than this. You're the NBA.com. You are not the Los Angeles Lakers / New York Knicks / Boston Celtics.com. You're not that. You have to be better than this. I could talk about this. This pissed me off so much. I'm not even a fan of either of these teams. Moving on from NBA.com, we then have the NBA media. I know that I've talked about this for a long time, but I do want to highlight the importance of this picture. So this picture is, this is obviously Stephen A. Smith, for those of you that don't know. This is a picture of Stephen A. Smith getting on his knees to beg Anthony Davis to get to the NBA Finals, because Stephen A. Smith literally he said he did not want to spend the NBA Finals in Denver. Those are his literal words. That was on the segment, and this stuck with me for a long time because this happened a couple years ago. But I feel like, I know that people say it's for entertainment. I know that people say it's for entertainment, but it is so incredibly draining. It's so incredibly draining to have your team, and this is the Nuggets' best team in a long time or whatever, and to have someone that works for the company that broadcasts the games to be like, I don't want to be there, man. I'm actively rooting against your team. He's a Knicks fan. He's not even a Lakers fan. He just wants to be in LA. Keep in mind, they shoot in New York and LA. Do you see how this just spawns negativity? This just spawns negativity, bro. Who is this for? Answer me that. We don't celebrate the league enough. We don't celebrate the cool stories about the league. We always look to tear it down. Now, beyond just Stephen A. Smith, and the fact is that the NBA on Christmas Day, the best part was the games, but it was often, a lot of the times, the air was taken out of whatever the momentums the game had by the halftime show. And so the halftime show is Malika Andrews trying her absolute best to get Stephen A. Smith, Bob Myers, and Kendrick Perkins to stay on topic. Bro. And the thing is that these halftime shows have often been devoid of chemistry, devoid of analysis, and it really does get deflating sometimes, because there will be certain games on for the NBA, and you then get to Stephen A. Smith and Kendrick Perkins talking about teams that are not even playing, players that are not even on that team. And it's really disorienting, because you're trying to do whatever. And Stephen A. Smith is talking about the Knicks, but it's Celtics 76ers halftime. What did you guys see from the game? You guys gonna tell me that? No? What were you doing this whole time? And look, there was a time and place way back in the day where Stephen A. Smith, at the very least, if he wasn't giving analysis, at least he was funny. And I think that time has long passed. We don't get no Kwame Brown rants. We don't get any Jamarcus Russell. We don't get no Lamar Odom rants. We don't get those really anymore, I don't think. I think that once the comedy element wore off, it started to get more and more just like, oh, dude, please. The thing about Inside the NBA is that Inside the NBA, above all else, is funny. The ESPN NBA halftime show they do not have the comedic chops that Inside the NBA has. So you should make up with it by trying to at least give analysis about the game or have topical conversations, but it seems to always just get derailed, and again, which frustrates the viewer, because you're having people on the screen talk about other things and not really celebrating or giving props to what they're saying, like what they're seeing. Instead, they're talking about something else. And again, cycle of negativity. I cannot talk about this enough. Now, I'm going to go to JJ Redick, who said that we don't really do a good job of celebrating the game. Now, the interesting thing about JJ Redick is that he, like a lot of other people, have been able to build platforms on YouTube or not from traditional sources where they are celebrating the game, whether it's a dunker spot with Nekias Duncan and Steve Jones Jr. Like, there are so many different platforms that do celebrate the game, but I do think that the most visible people in the sports media are not doing as much as they can. Now, specifically, while JJ Redick was not mentioning people, he didn't mention people by name, but he was talking about television across the board, how a lot of the sports media heads that you see on TV are often talking negatively about the game. And he's right. It's really hard to like just sit there and be like, yeah, they're really talking about the game in a refreshing way. Now, I'm not saying that these TV places, they don't do that ever. I'm not saying that. It just feels like they're negative to a point where it's very noticeable and it really gets infuriating. And then what JJ Redick said, Charles Barkley did a response on Inside the NBA. Now, the main problem with this is that this was during the Boston Celtics Minnesota Timberwolves highlight reel, and that was a really interesting game. But instead of having people talk about the game, once again, we then have Charles Barkley complaining about why people are not watching today's NBA. And I feel like this is where it's nice to talk about the double-edged sword of Inside the NBA in and of itself. If you ask me, Inside the NBA is one of the funniest shows on television. But if you also ask me, Inside the NBA is doing a subpar job of celebrating the game in and of itself, and it starts with mostly Shaq and some parts Chuck. Now, it's always a trend when there's a really tall player shooting a lot of threes. Shaq will be like, have them get into the paint more or whatever. But there's also a thing where it's just like Shaq often just starts to talk about certain players in a way like the more Shaq talks about players in the league, the more we're just like, dude, why are you talking about players like this? Like, Shaq has all the accolades, and Shaq talks about these players like they're actively gunning for his accolades and are like very close. He's talking about these players like they're in a legacy debate with him, and it's getting a little bit weirder and weirder as we go on. So in addition to Inside the NBA, Shaq also has a podcast where he likes to take digs at like players in the league and not in the league. Yeah, he talked about how Dwight Howard was a bus driver for the ring that he won with the Lakers, which isn't true. Like, he had a prominent role. He had a good role in that 2020 Lakers championship. I do not think that he was a bus rider, bro. Like, that's the thing here, is that, again, in NBA media, we are really good at moving the goalposts to whatever narrative we see fit. It's just one of those things where Shaq said this on like Christmas Eve or like the day, like 2 days before Christmas, and we're just like, bro, why? You don't have, whatever, man. Okay. I think that this show is very funny. They have some of the funniest moments of all time, but I do think that when Inside the NBA and the ESPN halftime show and you have First Take, they all complain about certain aspects of the game. It's not even like yeah. I feel like there's a difference between critiquing and then just flat out non-stop complaining about the league. I think that, again, JJ Redick he's onto something. If you go on TV and you see every network just absolutely trashing the product, then why would fans be interested in that? I totally get that. And as funny as these guys are, Charles and Shaq, when they talk, it just feels like it's a lot. That's all. And it just wears you down as a basketball fan, tuning in and being like, oh, this is gonna be a great matchup, and then they're shooting too many three. Like, I don't know. I'm just fed up, dude. I think another thing that kind of spurs the negativity of the NBA is the NBA buzzwords. Like, these blanket statements that we can say to make it seem like we're making a big critique of the game without like really like narrowing it down or really being specific or whatever. Like, the one that gets me is that like NBA players don't play defense. It annoys me to no end, bro. Yeah, NBA players, if you're watching NBA games and think that they don't play defense, man, I do not know what to tell you. I really don't. I think that these NBA defenses are having to constantly adjust to the evolution of NBA offenses, and there's a whole lot more space, which means there's a whole lot more distance to travel, and there's just a whole lot more effort that needs to be put on the defensive end. And even then, like, I do not understand like the whole players don't play defense anymore. I do not get it. I do not. It's just that part annoys me to no end, honestly. I think what also, it's something interesting where it's like the game to game slander, where you go on social media and you'll see like your favorite player, like they'll have a bad game. Bad games happen all the time, but like people will use that bad game, that one game sample size, to be like, yo, see, told you he's a free throw merchant. Oh, see, I told you they like, oh, this is why this guy's better than that guy. And I'm like, the game to game stuff, I'm like, Doesn't it get annoying a little bit? It was really tough last year seeing Cade Cunningham have bad games and then be compared to Jalen Green. That was really annoying because you know that those two are not the same. That's not the same circumstance in the slightest, but people were using any game whatsoever to try to like be like, oh, this is why this player's better than this player. It stems from like those graphics you see on social media as well. It stems from the media news cycle having to react to all of these performances. You know that in a longer sample size, that game's going to be like, oh yeah, okay, that happens. It's normal. But I just don't like how that happens at all either. And I think last but not least, the biggest thing to me about the NBA negativity epidemic is that everything, like 95% of things that you do in the league is seen as a failure. Like you're often seen, if you're not one of the top 5 players in the league, there's always something that can be said about you. And I'm like, bro, not every player could be top 5 in the league, right? Where, you know, we talked about ring culture. We bring that up all the time where, like, if you don't win a championship, it's just seen as a failure or whatnot. And I think that we gotta get out of that mindset. I feel like, again, we don't really allow teams to be mid. Now, no team really wants to be mid, but you have to just realize, and we understand, that you can't just go from tanking to a championship contender in one season. Like, we have to really celebrate the journey that it gets there, and I feel like we don't do a good enough job of that. Also, because I tweeted this out a couple of weeks ago where I was like, there are so many of my favorite basketball teams that won 30 to 40 games. I'm not talking about just Pistons teams. There are so many other fun basketball teams. Like letting a basketball team be a fun watch without them having to be a championship team all the time, it's really fun. I suggest that you try it. I suggest you going on League Pass and being like, this is a fun tandem. I like when this team plays this lineup, instead of, oh, this team, are they doing enough to win a championship? Do they have to make a trade or whatnot? We have to stop trying to force star players out of smaller markets. It is the most aggravating thing possible. LaMelo Ball earlier this year was balling out, pun intended, balling out in Charlotte. And then we had, I think, Chandler Parsons being like, he needs to go to a bigger market. And first of all, he has so many more years left on that contract, so where it doesn't make sense for the Hornets to do that anyway. It's just that the fact that that's what we lean to, instead of just celebrating the fact that this is the most fun player the Charlotte Hornets have had since Kemba Walker, we don't do that enough. We don't celebrate that enough. I remember when Anthony Edwards was starting to do well, people were trying to force him out of Minnesota. You gotta stop doing that, bro, because again, it circles all the way back to NBA.com, where it's like, this is not the intended marquee matchup. I'm like, why is it not? Why is it not? It could be. You gotta promote it more. Kevin Durant was right where it feels like sometimes no one that is involved with the NBA in terms of sports media, in terms of fans or whatever, like NBA basketball. And the more removed that we get from that tweet, the more people are starting to like see his point, because it feels like we can't just like let anything be. We can't just like celebrate anything for what it is. We always have to tear it down. And I kind of want to turn a corner and be better myself. I know I'm not perfect with it. I think that there are just so many factors that I didn't even get to all these factors, where I just felt like I needed to talk about it. So thank you guys for watching the end of the video. Feel free to like, feel free to comment, feel free to subscribe. I appreciate you guys. The goal is to get to 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year. And if we get there, great. If we don't, also fine. But I will get to the next video and I'll see you guys later. Have a good one, y'all. Bye.